Ladies and gentlemen,
I'm full of optimism.
Einstein's theory of relativity.
We're still seeing it quite well through that haze. T-minus 37 seconds.
The fight is growing confident.
E equals MC.
That all men are created equal.
About the future innovations.
And growing strength in the air.
Tear down this wall.
Something's happening. Coming up on staging.
This is Finding Your Frequency with your hosts, Jeff Spinard and Ryan Treasure. It's time to speak up, share your voice, and hear from the thought leaders.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another fantastic episode of Finding Your Frequency. I'm your host, Ryan Treasure, and we're here on Finding Your Frequency Friday with a great topic to discuss for the day. As you guys know, we're always trying to bring you some really cool content that you can use for yourselves, for your business, all of those types of things. And so, of course, as we all know, when you're an entrepreneur and you're starting a business, it's important to, understand the ins and outs of what you're doing from a law perspective. And of course, looking at, should I be a limited liability corporation, a C Corp, an S Corp, all of those things are things that come into play when you're starting your business. And so we're going to talk a little bit about this. We'll also talk about some of the loopholes of real estate and some of those things and how you can leverage that to grow your wealth. Because everybody knows you got to have that little side hustle or your main hustle, whatever that is, to help grow your passive income. And we're going to continue on with the series of Rich Dad Advisors today as we talk to Mr. Garrett Sutton. And Mr. Garrett Sutton is an author. And man, what a wonderful author he is. He's been writing books like you can't believe all over the place. Many books. And we'll get into some discussions about that. But of course, Garrett Sutton is a legal expert and founder of Corporate Direct and Sutton Law Center out of Reno, Nevada. And of course, I said best-selling author of 6 Rich Dad Advisor series. And we're going to talk about some of the new ones that he has. Start your own corporation, Loopholes of Real Estate. And then, of course, we have this great Starting Your Own Corporation book that I was mentioning earlier. So we want to welcome Mr. Garrett Sutton to the show. Garrett, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ryan. Pleasure to be with you.
Well, we're so glad to have you on. We appreciate you spending some time with us here today. I know you got a really busy schedule, so, let's get into it, huh?
That sounds good.
So I wouldn't be doing my due diligence to the listeners if I didn't start off with our, standard question that we have for just about everybody who comes on the Finding Your Frequency show. And that is, of course, we want to know a little bit of the story, a little bit of the background on how you became who you are today. So maybe just take a few minutes and tell us your story about how you found your frequency in life and in business and decided to do what you're doing.
Well, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in the Oakland Hills, and my dad was a judge in Oakland. And, we would come home from a day in the court and tell us stories about what happened in the courtroom. And one of the things that always stuck me with, or I remembered, was that these people who operated as sole proprietorships and general partnerships, lost all their personal assets. And it was really easy for someone to just set up a corporation. They didn't have LLCs back then, but you could set up a corporation and protect yourself. And so at a young age, I was just learning about the law as I sat around the dinner table, and it led me to, I went to Berkeley and took business, and then I went across the bay to Hastings Law School in San Francisco and became an attorney. And again, I always liked that idea of corporations and now LLCs being able to protect people, and so that's kind of how I arrived at my frequency, Ryan.
Oh, that must have been pretty interesting with your dad being a judge and, being able to kind of quiz him on some of the things that he had been dealing with in the law practice. Tell us a little bit about how that relationship was.
Well, it was a great relationship. Before he became a judge, he was a district attorney in Oakland, and the story is yet untold of how the police kept the Hells Angels and the Black Panthers at each other's throats. If those two groups had joined up, Oakland would have been a really tough place. So he told some of those stories, and then he would have these business cases, and those were the cases I really found interesting. And so that's kind of why when I went to Berkeley and when I went to Hastings, I focused on the business issues. Just it was something that interested me from a very young age. And here I am, decades later, and I'm still enjoying setting up corporations and LLCs for people, helping them maintain those entities so that they can stay protected. I mean, in the United States, we've only become more litigious over the years, and you really need to take those steps to protect yourself. They don't teach this to you in school, Ryan, as you know. This is something you have to gain on your own, and so it's been really fortunate to work with Robert Kiyosaki and travel the world, actually, and talk about how you can advance your financial future. And my job within that mix is to make sure that as you advance yourself, you're also protecting yourself with corporations and LLCs.
Yeah, I think that's a really big point to bring home, especially for our listening audience. You have a lot of people who say, I work for myself. And, you ask them, is a corporation, limited liability? And they're like, no, I just work for myself. And, in a gig economy that we're dealing with now, it's probably even more important that you're not just doing business as a sole proprietor, that you have some type of a legal entity that you're working under. Can you tell us, why that's important? Because I know with, almost more than 40 million lawsuits that are filed every year in the United States, how and why would somebody want to create one of those entities to maintain their business? What are the advantages of doing so?
Well, let's say you're a gig worker. California is really making that tough now, but around the country, there are plenty of people who are gig independent contractors, and they can do that in their own name, or they can operate through, let's say, an LLC, perhaps taxed as an S corp, and we can get into that too. But the gig worker is going to set up an LLC, operate through the LLC. When he signs a contract, it's going to be Joe Blow, manager of Gig LLC. He's going to get paid into the name Gig LLC. He's going to deposit the money in that bank account. Here's his benefit. If he gets sued on a job, they're going to sue the LLC, and that's who did the work. He is not going to be exposing his personal assets, the equity in his house, his personal bank account, his other brokerage accounts. Any other accounts are protected because the client that is suing him, did business with the LLC, not with Joe Blow as an individual. So that is a main advantage for setting up the LLC, just protecting your other assets. Ryan, spouses really don't like it when you get sued and you lose all the family assets. So it's really easy to set up one of these LLCs and be much better protected. The other thing, Ryan, is if you operate as a sole proprietor, whereby all of your assets are exposed, if you operate as a sole proprietor, the IRS is going to audit you at a 5 times greater rate than they do an LLC. The sole proprietor is just easy pickings for the IRS. Sometimes they don't have a bookkeeper. Sometimes they commingle business and personal monies. And so the IRS goes after the sole proprietor at a really great rate. And so just by operating through an LLC, you're going to reduce your audit risk and you're going to protect your personal assets.
Well, I think that's extremely important because nobody likes to get audited. There's like a commercial I see online all the time, and it's like, people would rather go to the dentist than get audited or something like that. And so I could I definitely agree with that. So when you're protecting yourself, that seems to be extremely important. I mean, you don't want to have, somebody sue you for some work that you've done and them take your house. When I guess if you have an LLC, you could probably have some type of insurance that's with your LLC that could mitigate, any payouts on that from the limited liability side, and then you're protecting yourself and the LLC. How important is, some type of insurance or something that goes along with creating these entities?
Well, that is a great question, Ryan, because I always recommend that insurance is the first line of defense. Right? You want that E&O insurance, that errors and omissions insurance for your business. You want, if their claim comes against the business, you turn it over to the insurance company and hopefully they cover it. But then If you operate as an individual and the claim exceeds the insurance, your personal assets are at risk. So the second line of defense is the LLC. So we have insurance for the business. If the claim exceeds that, then you have your LLC protecting your personal assets from exposure. So I always recommend that people have the umbrella policy, the insurance policy. I also suggest that people have an umbrella policy of insurance, whereby when their house and their autos are insured with the same company, say State Farm, you can ask for an umbrella policy. And like the term implies, that provides greater coverage. If you get in that horrific car wreck, the umbrella policy will exceed your regular policy. And for only $400 a year, you can get an extra $1 million of coverage. So in that case, we want someone who's suing you over a horrific car wreck to be able to get the umbrella insurance money. And if there's enough money there, they'll leave you alone on your LLCs, which may hold real estate, may hold brokerage accounts, may hold your businesses. So a combination of insurance and entities, be they corporations or LLCs, is really a smart way to go in our society these days.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You know, as we kind of look backwards, and we had mentioned the gig economy. You know, I'll use an example. If I'm a graphic designer or something like that, and you know, I'm using a vehicle and I'm driving around town, I'm visiting my customers, and yes, I have a limited liability corporation and all of that is well and good, and I have that protection and I have insurance, but you know, I have a few, you know, business-based assets. Maybe the car was like my regular car before, but now I'm using it every day to drive around to see customers. At what point do you have to make a decision to, you know, like pool some of those assets into the limited liability corporation versus being like your personal vehicle, right? Obviously, because you want to have the business to have the tax write-off of gas and mileage and maintenance and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
What I like to do, Ryan, is, you know, I recommend that people keep their vehicle in their personal name. Because if you get in a car wreck, right, whether the car's in an LLC or not, you're responsible for that wreck. That's your individual action. So if the car is held by your business LLC, you're giving someone suing over a car wreck the ability to get not only you personally, they can get your insurance, but they also, you're giving them a bridge into the business LLC. So I'd rather have the car in your individual name, have plenty of insurance, have an umbrella policy, as we mentioned, and then have your business pay you the 52 cents a mile or whatever it is now for the use of the car, so that you do get the benefit of your business paying for your business use of the car. But the car is in your personal name, and if there's a lawsuit, they're going after you personally, and hopefully you have enough insurance, but they're not going after your business. That's how we like to structure things.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I didn't even think about the fact that somebody could go after you and the LLC in a car accident scenario.
Right.
So that's a great point. I appreciate you bringing that to the table. I think that's important information for anybody who's, you know, an entrepreneur. They're in startup mode. They're trying to kind of figure things out. And, you know, we talk a lot about that on Finding Your Frequency. You know, the whole premise of the show is summoning the intestinal fortitude to step out of your comfort zone and go do something different, you know. And so that would mean not having your regular 9 to 5 and living somebody else's dream or working for somebody else's business, but, you know, taking that new idea and that new product, that new 3D printed something or other that you created and creating a business around that, but having those protections in place with the limited liability or S Corp or whatever that is and the insurance, it really just makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, just paying yourself back. I'm sure you see this all the time. I live in Arizona, in Phoenix, and you know, construction is booming. It's huge, you know, and I have a friend of mine, he just works for himself. I mean, he's been a journeyman woodworker for, you know, 20 something years and broke off like a few years ago and is doing his own thing. And, you know, he's been operating his own thing as a sole proprietorship and not having an LLC and, you know, going on job sites. And I'm like, dude, you really need to get like bonded and insured, like go get your contractor's license, like, you know, have all of those safeguards in place. Cause I feel like he's just at risk, you know, driving around in a truck that's in his name, doing work under his own name. I think that's a scary situation to be in.
Well, and it's really interesting, Ryan, is you'll talk to someone like that and they'll say, oh, it never happens to me. And then they have that wake-up call, right, where something bad happens on a job and they realize, oh, gosh, everything I have is exposed. And the key thing is at that point, after the accident happens, it's too late to gain protection, right? It's too late to put your business into an LLC because you were operating as a sole proprietor, and everything that you did up until the point of the new LLC, you're personally responsible for. And if you try and put it in an LLC after the accident, it's called a fraudulent conveyance. Anytime the word fraud is in a phrase, you got to watch out, right? You don't want to do a fraudulent conveyance whereby you're trying to hide assets from a creditor. So it's really unfortunate. I get these calls, Ryan, where someone has had something bad happen. They knew they should have set up an LLC, but they waited until there was a problem, and then it's too late to be protected. So your guy there in Arizona doing the work, you just need to impress upon him that he should do it now, because when something bad happens, it's just too late.
I'm going to send him a link to this show, and when he hears us talking about him, he'll know that I was serious every time I told him that he needed to go get an LLC.
Well, he got advice direct from an attorney. I mean, he didn't have to pay for the consult. He should take your advice.
Yeah, maybe he needs to pay us. Yeah, well, I appreciate all the information that you're giving us, because I think, anybody who's thinking about taking that step out to go do that, it's extremely important to do so. A lot of times I think this comes down with an LLC too. I've had some experiences with this where, you're working with a vendor and they want you to sign an agreement for, 12 months or 24 months or whatever that is. Let's say it's for, like a lease or a business phone system or something like that you're getting that's part of your operational expenditures. I've had certain circumstances where they've said, oh, yeah, we know you're an LLC, but we need you to sign this document, which is a personal guarantee. Let's talk about that, because I think a lot of vendors are doing that nowadays to LLCs, and they're saying, hey, well, it's great you're an LLC, but we need a personal guarantee. And, in my mind, I'm going like, yeah, well, if you need a personal guarantee to do business with a business, then maybe we shouldn't do business.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to I would take that line, but you're going to see it, especially when you start up. If you've been in business for 3 years or less, most people are going to ask for the personal guarantee, because they know that an LLC can go bankrupt or out of business, and then they're left in the cold. So you will see requests for personal guarantees all the time. Now, one way to deal with it is you can build business credit. You have a business and you want to have a good Paydex score, a good number where people are willing to extend credit to the LLC because they've proved that they're creditworthy. There are ways to do that. I co-authored a book called Finance Your Own Business, where we talk about building business credit. You can get a credit card in the name of your LLC, and maybe at the start you have to personally guarantee that, but over time, as you build up credit, as you pay the credit card bill on a timely basis, eventually you can get credit in the name of the LLC. And over a period of time, you'll be able to have the LLC sign for the phone system without a personal guarantee. So you can get to that point, but as you say, Ryan, at the start, they're going to ask for that personal guarantee, and then it's your decision to provide that or find another vendor.
Yeah, and I'm always of the thought process that I'm finding another vendor, because I feel like with so much competition out here in the space, and especially with every passing day, it seems like technology is making our lives I'm not going to say easier. I'll give you an example. I was playing around with an automated artificial intelligence software tool that helps you to expand your social media footprint, right? Because I'm sure you understand this, you have a book, so I'm sure you guys are promoting the book online and you're letting people know about about events and things that you're going to be at. And like, it's really cumbersome for you to type in, one Facebook post, one Twitter post, one LinkedIn post, whatever other sites that you might be using. And so I was playing with this AI engine, and man, did the technology make it a lot easier. I still had to do some of the work, but I was able to, process like 18 social media posts in the same amount of time as it takes me to do one. And so you have software that is allowing things to be, bigger, smarter, faster. So why stick with a company who wants a personal guarantee when there's so much, capitalism out there that you can just go find a different vendor that does the same thing that doesn't require that?
Exactly right. I mean, I think people always benefit from shopping around. When I talk to clients, I do consults all day long, and I hear, especially with regard to insurance, that the insurance company won't let you do this or that. And I go, well, how many insurance companies have you talked to? Oh, well, one or two. And you really need to shop around on some of these things. So you're right, Ryan. I mean, getting on the phone, I know it takes a little bit of time, but getting on the phone or the internet and finding other competitors, other sources, is really good, because if you can minimize those personal guarantees, all the better.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Let's talk about forming of these corporations, these entities. I know we talked about how important it was to have one for the protection and protecting those things. But as you look at forming your LLC or corporation, I see a lot of places that are like, it's a Delaware corporation, or it's a Wyoming or Nevada, or, like our company here is an Arizona LLC. How do you go about making the decision of like which legal state or entity that your LLC is drawn from, and what's the advantage or disadvantage of that?
Well, you did name the top three right at the start: Delaware, Wyoming, and Nevada. All three of them compete to be the best state to set up in. And in terms of LLCs, Nevada, Wyoming, and Delaware have the best asset protection law for LLCs. Arizona is okay; it's not as good as the first three. So you want to utilize a state that is strong in asset protection. We like Wyoming because they have the asset protection like Delaware and Nevada, but in Nevada and Delaware, it's $350 a year or more per entity. Wyoming's only $50 a year. Wyoming also does not list your name on the state database for corporations or LLCs, so you have more privacy with Wyoming. And so when we give people the option of Delaware, Wyoming, and Nevada, and we explain the benefits and the various differences, 95% of the people will pick Wyoming. It's just a great state to set up your entity in. Now, if you're operating in Arizona like you are, Ryan, you would either have an Arizona LLC, which is fine, or you could have a Wyoming LLC qualified to do business in the state of Arizona. And what that means is you only have one entity. We set up in Wyoming, and then we get permission from the Arizona Corporations Commission to do business in the state of Arizona. So you're following Arizona law, but you have the protection, because you formed in Wyoming, of a Wyoming LLC. So these are issues that, I write about in my books, and we get on the phone with people and talk through them. It's not that difficult to understand, but it is a good question to ask. If your advisor says, oh, you have to use a Texas LLC in every single circumstance, well, that's not the right answer. We do have choices in America. It's kind of a constitutional right to travel issue. You can set up wherever you want. And so when you give people an overview, they look to Nevada, Wyoming, and Delaware. And when you drill down a bit, at least for us, Wyoming is the best state.
So if I was to get sued by somebody doing business and my LLC was formed in Wyoming, does that mean that I have to fly to Wyoming to do court?
Well, here, let's look at it. If we have a Wyoming LLC that's qualified in Arizona, and you're doing business in the state of Arizona, and a client sues you over the business, that case would take place in Arizona because you're doing business in Arizona. The client is in Arizona. So the proper venue for that case would be Arizona. Wyoming comes into play if you get in that horrific car wreck, right? And that's called the outside attack. The first attack whereby the client that you're doing business with is called the inside attack. They get to sue the LLC itself. The outside attack is you get in that horrific car wreck and someone wants to get at your assets. And you've got an umbrella policy, and that's good, and hopefully they leave you alone. But if the attorney really, you don't have the umbrella policy and they want to try and get at your assets, that they're coming from the outside. They don't have a relationship with your LLC. They've never done business with your LLC. They just want to get the assets inside it. In this case, Wyoming law would apply, and Wyoming has the charging order, which is a key asset protection feature. It's really a lien on distribution. So they get a judgment against you. Ryan owns the LLC. They want to get at the assets of the LLC. They can't barge inside the LLC and force you to sell all the assets. Instead, they have to wait around to get distributions from the LLC. Now, most attorneys who are suing you on a car wreck claim, they're on a contingency, meaning they don't get paid until they collect. And waiting around to get a distribution from an LLC is just not a good use of their time, right? They'd rather go on to the next case that has plenty of insurance money. So I always recommend that our clients have plenty of insurance, especially when we're dealing with homes and autos, that they have that umbrella policy. So if something bad happens, the attorney can get at the insurance money. They're good at getting at the insurance money. But then when you have your other assets in LLCs, they tend to leave you alone. It's just not a good use of their time. Now, I should mention, Ryan, that California, no surprise to anyone, has the weakest law for LLCs. In California, unlike the charging order of Wyoming, in California, you could go to court and say, Your Honor, I have a claim against Ryan. He's got assets inside his LLC. I want to get at him. And the court in California says, sure, you were in the car wreck accident. You go and take Ryan's assets out of his business LLC. So that's why some states we never want to use if we don't have to. And that would include California, New York, Georgia's pretty weak. And why we'd like to use Nevada, Wyoming, and Delaware, because they're strong.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and very well said. I appreciate you explaining to that. Garrett, hold tight. We're going to take a quick commercial break. And when we come back from the commercial break, I want to talk about, the books that you have and, some of your affiliation with Rich Dad, Poor Dad as an advisor to the series. And of course, your relationship with Robert Kiyosaki and all those types of things. So when we come back on the other side of the commercial break, we'll talk a little bit more about this. Ladies and gentlemen, you're tuned in to Finding Your Frequency right here on the Voice America Talk Radio Network. I'm your host, Ryan Treasure. Please make sure that if you're listening to this, you give us 5 stars because 5 stars are way better than 4. Big shout out to the folks who have given us 5-star ratings on iTunes. I looked them up yesterday. We have over 150 5-star ratings on iTunes. So thank you guys very much for keeping Finding Your Frequency at the top of mind. We really appreciate the love. So let's talk a little bit about kind of what you've been working on recently. I know that we were just kind of going down the rabbit hole about LLCs and corporations and asset protections, which is extremely important. I want to shift gears just a little bit, and I know that you're a select few individuals that are part of the Rich Dad Advisors for Robert Kiyosaki, and I've interviewed several other of your advisors and man, what a wealth of knowledge. I think all of you guys as advisors coming together, you guys are like Voltron, you like one of you's a leg, the other one's an arm, and then the head, and then you all join together, and the next thing you know, you're like the Power Team International. So I definitely love that. But tell us a little bit about your experience with the Rich Dad Advisors and how you guys work together with Robert Kiyosaki.
Well, it's been great, Ryan. I've been working with Robert for, almost 20 years now. And it's been really great traveling not only around America, but around the world. talking about financial education. And his book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, is the best-selling personal financial book of all time. And at least once a year, we're in a foreign country, one or more, talking about financial education. In October, we were just in Singapore, Japan, and New Zealand. And the audiences in the foreign countries are just as incentivized to learn this stuff as those in the United States. So it's really been a great 20 years working with Robert. And we do get together as advisors. Robert has us read at least one interesting book a year, and we get together and do a book study about it. So we do get together as advisors. We are assisting Robert and Kim and others in the organization with, I assist with some of the legal issues. Tom Wheelwright assists with some of the tax issues. So we do help each other as well. So it's just been a really great experience.
Yeah, I had Tom here in the studio. Here we're in Phoenix, and so we got to have him come into the studio and do an interview face to face. And yeah, what a great guy, especially talking about taxes. And taxes can kind of be a boring subject. But man, it was really interesting to talk to Tom about taxes and his approach to that. And, we got to have a laugh about why, Amazon doesn't pay any taxes.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of sense. I see so many social media posts online where they're like all angry and they're like, well, if Amazon paid taxes, we'd have more. And it's like, you guys don't understand the way capitalism works. Like that, Amazon is making jobs. Like how many people work at Amazon that pay federal income tax? I mean, let's think about that,
right.
Or pay state income tax. I think that the government itself, state and federal, they're probably making a lot more money off of incrementally taxing the worker versus they are the corporation.
Right. And, Ryan, there's one thing I do want to mention, and that is if some of your listeners already have a corporation or an LLC, there's one aspect to that a lot of people don't focus on, and that is you set up a corporation or LLC for protection, for limited liability protection. But you do have these annual requirements to make sure that you stay protected. And so that's one of the messages that I give when I'm traveling the country is, yes, you've set up an LLC, you have the bank account, you're operating through the LLC, the money comes into the LLC, all that's great. But you need to do minutes of a meeting every year. You need to make sure you have a registered agent in each state where you have incorporated or you do business. And if you fail to follow these corporate formalities, someone can do what's called piercing the corporate veil, meaning they have a claim against the corporation, but because you didn't follow the formalities, they can go through the corporation, they can pierce the corporate veil and go after the individual and get their personal assets. So you've set up this LLC to protect yourself, and because you didn't follow the ongoing formalities, the requirements that you have to follow every year, you're now personally liable for the claim. So that's something that your listeners should know, that just setting up the entity isn't enough. You've got to take steps to maintain it on an annual basis. Now, if you haven't done so, don't tell anyone. Just call us and we can clean it up for you. But it is important to know that there are ongoing requirements.
Gary, you're telling me that I can't just buy a car and drive it till the wheels fall off? I have to do oil changes.
You have to put oil in
I got to put tires on it. I got to make sure the brakes are working. Yeah, I thought that would throw that out there as an analogy, right? Because
that is a great analogy. Do you mind if I
use
use that in the future?
No, please do. I mean, it's something. Right. It's something that I think anybody can connect with, right? We all have cars. We drive around.
Right.
That you got to put gas in it to get it to go. The gas is like effort for your business. You got to have some effort to get your car rolling down the road, but it's not going to roll down the road if you don't take care of it, maintain it, and then of course you got to keep it clean so that way you have good marketing.
There you go. That's a great image.
Yeah, so. I'll have to credit somebody for that one. I heard it from somewhere. I can't remember. It was a keynote speech I was listening to. They were talking about a bicycle. I'm trying to remember. His dad was super famous keynote speaker. Anyways, it was the bicycle method. And he was talking about business and like, oh, you got to have a seat and you got to have a handlebars and you got to have the wheels and and I was like, oh, a car would be so much more sexy. Let's use a car analogy around that.
So good. Yeah, that is a great analogy, but you do want to make sure that your entity is running in tip-top shape. You've got to, every year, get it into the shop and do the minutes and make sure that you paid the state. If you lose your state charter for failing to, pay Wyoming, for example, the $50 a year, it's kind of hard to say that your activities are protected when the state's revoked your charter. So these are simple things to do, but if you don't do them, they can be pretty dramatic.
Yeah, I think there's some other things that people need to think about, and this isn't probably for the newer LLCs or corporations, probably for maybe some that have been around for a little while. But, I hear a lot of people who are started a business. An example, like, dad starts a business and he operates this business for 25, 30 years and he has kids, and then his kids are going to get into the business as well. And, you have this limited liability with, dad as the owner of the company. How do you create, number one, a succession plan that, make sure that the succession follows the orders or will of, the person who created the LLC or corporation in the first place, to make sure that you don't get stuck in escrow with taxes and, all of those kind of things as part one of my question. And then part two is, how do you deal with that in a manner of, if you're the LLC owner and you get sick, and you have 14, 15, 16, 20, 30, 50, whatever employees, how does the company know how to operate in the stead of the loss of its leader? And then how do you manage a succession plan to somebody who, if you plan on, giving the business to one of your kids?
Well, those are good questions. On the first one with the kids, I certainly have seen family situations, and it's pretty easy to bring the kids in. The question is the whole family dynamics. I mean, are the kids going to get along with each other? Are the kids going to respect dad enough to know that, he's acting in their best interests? The whole personal side of things is really important. In terms of the succession, I mean, there are plenty of ways that dad can gift to the kids or allow the kids to earn their way into the business. So that part of it is pretty basic, but seeing how the families operate as individuals and the family dynamics, that's where the fireworks are. In terms of the loss of the leader, yeah, that is also very important because, the employees are used to having a dynamic figure, leading. And I've had some clients that will groom someone to be the successor. And so over a period of time, it's understood that this person is someday going to take over. And so there's not a lot of anxiety over who's going to be the leader, right? I mean, if you spring that on people as the dad's 99 years old, and no one has been groomed to fill that spot, that can be a shock to the company. So if the person has been identified and has been groomed, I see that working better than just an announcement at the end of someone's career. In terms of preparing someone for that position, I think the father, the leader, needs to sit down with this person as well as with the attorney and the CPA, the whole team. I think the person who's coming into that position needs to be aware of the various legal and tax ramifications for it. Especially if you're going to be selling a business, it takes about 2 years to get a business ready to sell. To turn over a business to family members, it's going to be at least a 2-year process, maybe 5. So people who are thinking about this really should not wait until the last minute to try and do this, because it's a multi-year process.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no telling too during that process, like, how does the business continue operating in that space? Because you do have, those number of employees that have put in their time, effort, and energy, and they are part of the reason why, the business is operational and revenue growing and all of those things. And that's the last thing I think. If I owned a company, that'd be the last thing that I want to do is like leave the people who have helped me to attain the status of the current company and like leave them high and dry, because they all have families. They all have, they depend on their jobs for their families and their income.
Right. Well, and Ryan, there is an option called the Employee Stock Option Ownership Plan, an ESOP, whereby the founder can sell the company to the employees. And then once the founder leaves, the employees have a board of managers and, they have a way to carry the business forward. It's interesting when you read the case studies about ESOPs, some work and some don't. Sometimes that leader is the glue that holds everything together. And when he's gone, the other employees just can't continue with the business. So it doesn't work in all cases. But there are plenty of options for getting your business to the employees.
So let's talk about this other book that you have that's called Loopholes of Real Estate, Secrets of Successful Real Estate Investing. You would think that with all of your legal background, maybe, I don't know, you got into some component of real estate. And I would love to tell you that I've read this entire book, but it was only dropped on my desk a few days ago. But honestly, I mean, loopholes of real estate, I'm sure that there's, lots of legal things that are needed in real estate. Let's talk a little bit about those, because I feel like real estate, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you talk about some of the, and we've discussed this a few times on some other shows, there's like, I think Robert has like 4 or 5 pillars of, revenue generation with, like paper and stocks and stuff being one of them. And the other one is, the real estate portion. But to me, I feel like real estate is probably the fastest way for somebody to grow their portfolio in assets and such like that. So let's talk a little bit about that. And, what are some of the important things that people need to know before they start getting into real estate, other than what I feel is an obvious question about, getting educated about real estate and the real estate market in the first place. But from your perspective, from the legal perspective, what are some things that are, you think, important for somebody to check out before they, start, dropping down payments on rental houses?
Well, I think certainly education is the way to go. Do you have to read 100 books? No, I think you're going to learn a lot about real estate by investing, but you should get a grounding in real estate before you start investing. I mean, maybe that's 5 books, maybe that's some seminars. There's plenty of webinars online that you can watch, but you're really going to learn a lot by doing. Now, Loopholes of Real Estate talks about topics that are legal topics that really most people don't know. Certainly I talk about the asset protection, how to use an LLC, how we set up Wyoming LLCs that own the Arizona LLCs, and how we structure things. But we also talk about things like title. How do you take title to the real estate? Do you take it in your individual name? Well, if you do, it's like being a sole proprietor. You're personally responsible for everything. So you set up an LLC, but Ryan, some people will set up the LLC and then forget to take title in the name of the LLC. You need to do that second step of transferring title from your name into the name of the LLC. And then there are various ways of transferring title. Do you use a grant deed or do you use a quitclaim deed? You're never going to use a quitclaim deed. A lot of people mispronounce it as a quick claim deed, like it's easy to do, but it doesn't provide you with the continuity of title insurance. So these are things that are not taught in school, but a good book that condenses all of this legal information for investing in real estate. That was my intent in writing Loopholes of Real Estate, so that people will understand that there are these legal loopholes that if you don't know about, you're not going to close them. So I want you to understand the loopholes. I want you to take the legal steps to close those loopholes so that you're not going to get sued or lose all of your personal assets.
Yeah, nobody wants to get sued and lose their personal assets. Right. One last question for you before we wrap up the interview here, but I always had wondered this. If you have an LLC and you're doing business and, you want to get into real estate, and so, you have a rental property or something like that you might use the business's earnings from to reinvest in a piece of property that's kind of maybe outside of the business, it's core business anyways. What do you do with your, like your own house, your personal house, the one that you live in with your family? Is that like the car, the same idea? You want to keep that car and that personal house under your personal name and that not be part of the LLC? Explain that just a little bit.
Well, you raised a couple questions there. So let's talk about the protecting your personal residence first. Most states have what's called the homestead exemption. And this started in Texas when they were an independent republic. And it was a way to get ranchers to come down to Texas. And the Texas homestead says if you have your house on a parcel in Texas, someone who's a later creditor can't get at your house. They can't get at any of the equity in your house. And this was a huge tool for development of Texas, and other states followed suit. So, for example, Florida has an unlimited homestead exemption. If you live in a $5 million home and you get in a car wreck and someone sues you for $10 million, they can't get your $5 million home. It is completely protected. Now, other states have a different dollar amount. California, it's $100,000. And, every house in California is now worth $1 million. So how do you protect
every time you talk, it just makes me hate California more and more.
Yeah. So
I guess hate's a strong
there's
word.
a reason
Dislike.
I'm living in Nevada because I grew up in California. But anyway, California has a $100,000 homestead exemption. So if you get sued, you have the homestead on the property, but the house is worth $1 million. They can force a sale of the house and collect $900,000 from you. So in that case, you'll look at using an LLC. Now, your second question, Ryan, is you've got money coming out of the business, and how do you take title to the real estate you're going to buy? I would not put a rental property, any piece of real estate, in the same LLC that you operate your business through. The issue being, if you get sued in the business, well, they can get what's inside the business, and here's this duplex that you own. Conversely, you have a tenant in the duplex, and the tenant sues over something that happens on the property, they could get the assets of your business because that's what's inside the LLC. So we always want to segregate business operations from rental real estate. So you're going to use two separate entities for those activities.
That makes a lot of sense, Garrett, a whole bunch. And so it'd kind of be like, if I have my main company is like Ryan LLC, and then I decide, okay, I'm going to, go get some real estate. Now I'm going to create a new LLC called Ryan Real Estate LLC or something, I'm just being plain, but,
No, that's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, you would not put the real estate into your business. We want to protect both of them, and so we're going to use separate LLCs.
Well, Garrett, I appreciate you jumping on. And for those of you who are listening, make sure you go check out the books, Start Your Own Corporation, and of course, Loopholes of Real Estate, both by author Garrett Sutton and our legal expert who's been joining us today. We really appreciate your time. Garrett, where can people find you and more information about you on the internet?
Well, our main website is corporatedirect.com, and we also offer a free 15-minute consultation with one of our incorporating specialists. So if you're interested in setting up an LLC or a corporation in any one of the 50 states, you can call 800-600-1760, and we'll get on the phone with you for 15 minutes and see if we can help you. So Corporate Direct and 800-600-1760.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the big round of applause for Garrett Sutton, our legal expert joining us today, one of the fantastic Rich Dad advisors joining us right here on Finding Your Frequency. Garrett, thank you so much again for joining us on the show. We really appreciate your time. And, as we move through the year of 2020 and we start looking at some of these, different things that are happening all over the world and all over the country and changes that are happening, I think at some point we'll probably have to do a follow-up interview later on this year and kind of see how things have shooken out later on in 2020, as it's going to be one heck of a dynamic year.
I'd be happy to do so.
Awesome. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening on your favorite podcatching device, make sure you give us a nice review because 5 stars are way better than 4. And of course, you can follow us all over social media at Radio Ryan 1, at Jeff Spinney 2, and of course, follow the network at Voice America TRN. And you can check out the website at findingyourfrequency.net. Thank you guys very much for tuning in to this great and wonderful special episode of Finding Your Frequency right here on the Voice America Talk Radio Network.